Hey, welcome into this episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast, our top 30 wide receiver rankings broken down into tiers. Now, you found this video on our brand new YouTube channel, and we are currently running a draft guide giveaway. All you have to do is subscribe to this channel, comment down below, and we are choosing one winner per video for the rest of the offseason to win a free copy of our 2024 Fantasy Football Fellas draft guide. So make sure you have those notifications turned on as well so you can be alerted when all of our new episodes are up and to see if you are the lucky winner on each episode. Again, subscribe, comment down below. Draft guide could potentially be yours for absolutely free. Without further ado, let's dive on into the rankings. We're going to dive into our top 30 wide receiver rankings, placing them into tiers S through E, all according to our 2024 draft guide. Let's dive on in, fellas, and start in the S tier, where there are only two players in this tier. It is Tyreek Hill and it is CeeDee Lamb. I think you could make a case for a handful of other guys that we're going to be talking about shortly, but if we're being perfectly honest, these two are head and shoulders, in my opinion, above the field this year. Cameron, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think they just have such a clear opportunity. It's the same as last year for these two guys, right? Same quarterback, same system. We know they're top 5 talents in the league, and they've just done it year after year. So, I mean, right, Tyreek Hill, back-to-back 1,700-yard seasons. CeeDee Lamb putting up 181 targets last year. Nothing has really changed for them to make us go, ooh, we're not going to see that again this season.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill, very clearly the focal point of the Miami Dolphins offense. CeeDee Lamb, the same boat. These are two guys who are also going to draw at least 165, 170 targets, it feels like, this year. You can make the case that Tyreek is more efficient than CeeDee Lamb, but I do think CeeDee Lamb is probably going to draw more targets than Tyreek solely because he has less competition. Tyler, out of these two, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, who is your preference in drafts, or are you splitting your exposure pretty evenly? Now, exposure is more a best ball talk. In a redraft league, do you have a preference between Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb, or are you still sorting that out at this point in the offseason?
I would say that my preference is Tyreek Hill, just because we've seen what the floor can be for CeeDee Lamb. I know that the first half of last season was a ways in the past at this point, but it was not great at the beginning of the season for CeeDee Lamb, and then they turned it around in the second half of the season. So we're kind of hoping that continues into this year versus Tyreek Hill, where we've seen it in back-to-back seasons, like Cam said, with 1,700 plus yard season. So that's my leaning, but Again, these are the two guys that are head and shoulders above everyone else at the position. You can't go wrong with either one of them.
The wide receiver 1 overall and in fantasy points per game last year, CeeDee Lamb. The wide receiver 2 overall and wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game, Tyreek Hill. They are on track to repeat that again in 2024. Let's move to the A tier, a smaller tier. Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and Jamar Chase. We are all still very in on Justin Jefferson. I've heard quite a few takes, actually, that have been not necessarily anti-Justin Jefferson, but I feel like people they're starting to get cold feet on what Justin Jefferson could actually be this year and placing him at the bottom of this tier. And I've heard some people say, like, oh yeah, he'll be, a back half wide receiver 1 this year and not a top half wide receiver 1, which to me feels crazy for a guy who was averaging, right around 24 fantasy points per game until he got injured last year. And then even with Nick Mullins at the end of the season was averaging 22 fantasy points per game. So Cameron, given that context around Justin Jefferson, how in are you on Justin Jefferson still?
I mean, after these first 2 guys, it just feels like, why not take Justin Jefferson? He had 1,000 yards last year in 10 games. I mean, we're talking about a guy who in, those 4 games you talked about with Nick Mullins at quarterback. It's not going to get worse than what it was at the quarterback position at the end of the year for the Vikings last year. No matter how bad we think Sam Darnold, like the floor is, it's not going to be worse than what we saw. And yet in each of those 4 games, Justin Jefferson had double-digit touchdowns. He had double-digit PPR fantasy points. He had 15, 26, 10, and 36. So maybe we get a little more variability than we saw in the beginning of the year, where he went 24, 24.9, 27.9, 26.5 fantasy points per game before he got injured. So maybe we don't have that level of consistency. but he's still got the same ceiling and he's still got a really good floor. And so as a guy, in this wide receiver 4 position, he's just too good at football and has a coach who is dedicated to getting him the ball that you really can't put him lower no matter what the quarterback situation is.
Yeah, and I think especially you look at the situation this offseason. TJ Hawkinson, who is going to miss the start of the season, and we don't have a specific update on Jordan Addison, but it seems like he's probably going to miss some time at the start of the year. You may get upwards of 4 games where it is just Justin Jefferson and Aaron Jones as quite literally the only weapons in this offense. At some point, that volume has to mean something, doesn't it, Ty?
No, it absolutely does. And the argument that people will make for Justin Jefferson is that he's going to have bad quarterback play, but he had bad quarterback play last year. So if it almost feels like we're double counting the bad quarterback play, and there will be some guys that we talk about later on that have the same, situation in terms of quarterback play. Don't double count the quarterback play. Like, we know it's going to be bad, but as long as Kevin O'Connell is Justin Jefferson's play caller, Justin Jefferson's going to be just fine, no matter who's throwing him the ball. Again, if we think that Nick Mullins is journeyman quarterback, and I know it's not much better with Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, but can't be worse than Nick Mullins, right? I mean, if Kevin O'Connell can make Nick Mullins somewhat fantasy relevant because he's supporting other fantasy relevant players, it can't really get that bad.
Now, I did think you bring up a valid point, Cameron, of the variability, right? Because Amon-Ra St. Brown is next in our rankings at wide receiver 4. And this is a guy who only scored less than 18 fantasy points per game, or scored less than 18 fantasy points in the game 5 times last year. He is as consistent and reliable as they come. There's even a case to be made that he might even be more reliable than a Tyreek Hill and a CeeDee Lamb. He might not give you as many points, but does that boil into your rankings? Because as of right now, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown ranked 1 spot ahead of Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, it does. And just to even further that point, you said 5 games below 18. He only had 3 games below 16. And he only had 1 double-digit PPR fantasy game last season, right? I mean, my worry last year was, is he going to be able to find the end zone enough, to really have top 3 numbers? Well, he scored 10 touchdowns. So he proved, I'm going to be able to find the end zone. We knew the targets were going to be there. He's averaging 12.5 yards per reception. So, yeah, I mean, the consistency does. And it's just the fact that if he's consistently putting up, 8 receptions a game on 10 target, on 11 targets for 70 yards and a touchdown, it's hard to move him any lower in your rankings. And we've only seen Amon-Ra get better, right? From his rookie year to, second year to last year, he has continually gotten better. So how can you knock a guy? And then, we talk about the playing indoors for Detroit. That actually matters. For most teams, it's kind of like, oh, whoop-de-doo. For Detroit, it matters. And so it's just another thing that you're just adding to what is already, a great outlook for Amon-Ra.
When you're as high volume of a passing offense as the Detroit Lions are, keeping that efficiency, keeping that pace, keeping that play style up season round indoors is going to be crucial for that team, which, again, I do think bodes well for an Amon-Ra, where he could draw another massive target share, another 160 plus targets again this year. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody if he surpasses 170 in the range of a Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb if they're throwing the ball at the rate they were last year. Now, Jamar Chase is kind of the odd duck of this group, I feel like, because he's the one where, what do you knock him for? He's got the quarterback play. Joe Burrow was back. He's been a top 6 fantasy wide receiver in fantasy points per game his first 2 years in the league. Last year was kind of a throwaway nightmare season for the Bengals. I think we're all willing to toss that one out. But what keeps him at the bottom of this tier, Ty? Because I've seen some people argue he should be ranked as the number 1 overall wide receiver this year.
I think it's kind of 2-part. One is just the uncertainty with Joe Burrow, who has been cleared, by the way, cleared for contact. So Joe Burrow is good to go. He's all systems go. So that really should kind of alleviate any kind of doubt that you have about Joe Burrow and the quarterback play for Jamar Chase. The other thing is that we haven't really seen, Jamar Chase has had over 80 receptions in every year of his career so far. He's got 81, 87, 100, but he hasn't seen 150 or more targets. The first 4 guys have, right? So not to, and like at that point, like we're splitting hairs, right? Like we're talking about a difference of what, like 15 targets maybe, but we just haven't seen it yet from Ja'Marr Chase. It could very well be this year, but again, I think that's why we find Ja'Marr Chase at the bottom of this tier, is we have not seen him, command the large sum of targets of 150 plus, 160 plus that we want to see, or that we have seen in the first 4 guys.
I don't want to say I'm scared by Joe Burrow's wrist injury, because I would much rather have Joe Burrow at 90% health than whatever we were getting from Joe Burrow last year while he was injured. I mean, the guy couldn't grip a football to throw it, if you remember the clips on the sideline. The thing that I keep seeing from doctors that I trust in the space is that, yes, Joe Burrow is healthy, but this is an injury that changes his career forever. This isn't just like all right, you broke your wrist, it'll be back to normal health and you should be able to throw a football in no time. Like, there's going to be better days than others for Joe Burrow for the foreseeable future, and the foreseeable future being what appears to be multiple years. It's not just a one repair fixes all, a one procedure fixes all. It seems like there's going to be better days than others for Joe Burrow. So I'm worried we might not get the same consistency with Joe Burrow, but it's not a big enough concern for me where it's worth pushing Ja'Marr Chase down a full tier. I think he just belongs at the bottom of this tier because we all know the level of talent that he is. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about before. If I could really put it, I'd have the S plus tier of Tyreek and CD, and this is the S tier. I mean, it's only like a half step down. And like you said, we're splitting hairs. It's Jefferson, inconsistent quarterback play. Amon-Ra, we just don't see the same ceiling. And then Ja'Marr Chase, we just got a couple question marks. But it's not to say that any of those guys can't finish as a wide receiver 1 overall, or that we're doubting them to be a top 3 guy. Like it's just that teeniest little bit where it feels like we should make that distinction.
That's a perfect way to put a bow on these first 2 tiers. And before we move on to the B tier, I want to give a quick reminder. You can listen to our podcast in a variety of ways, right? I've said multiple times now, the most entertaining way is to watch it over on YouTube, right? YouTube.com/@thefantasyfootballfellas. We're also doing our draft guide giveaway here as well. You just have to subscribe to that channel, comment below on this video on that channel. We're choosing one lucky winner from each video for the rest of the offseason. Again, youtube.com/@thefantasyfootballfellas. Then we also have our podcast feed as well. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. We've had some people who have been loyal listeners since we launched the podcast way back in, what was that, May of 2021? I mean, we have had so many loyal listeners since then. So if you want to join the clan over there, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from. Again, youtube.com/@thefantasyfootballfellas. And wherever you get your podcast from, the top 2 ways you can listen to our podcast. Let's dive into the B tier now. Again, a very small tier. And again, where we take a half step down from the S tier to the A tier, we take maybe like a 3/4 step down from this A tier to this B tier, which is Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, and Garrett Wilson. Rank these 3 in order of confidence you have in them this season. Not where you have them ranked, but confidence you have in them that they'll return on where you have them ranked. So confidence you have in Puka Nacua returning on ADP where is he going right now? Pulling up the doc. Currently going as a wide receiver 6, AJ Brown as a wide receiver 8, Garrett Wilson, as a wide receiver 8, Puka as a wide receiver 7, Garrett Wilson as a wide receiver 6. Wow, could not get that one out. I was looking at Ty's rankings and I'm like, this doesn't seem right. Where would you rank them in confidence in terms of where they're being drafted and where you think they'll finish?
My confidence, I go AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua. And the main reason I have Puka last is just because I'm still a believer in Cooper Kupp. And I think he's going to be good enough where we maybe don't see the same ceiling we're hoping for from Puka from these other 2 wide receivers.
For me, I would say Garrett Wilson, I have the most confidence in, and then it goes Puka, then AJ Brown. And for me, it is, I trust Sean McVay more than I do with Kellen Moore. And I don't think that Cooper Kupp is going to play a huge part in seeing any kind of regression from Puka Nacua in terms of volume. So that sounds like I'm very much out on AJ Brown. I'm not. He is still like the one in Philly. Like he's going to he hasn't, what was the stat? He hasn't finished lower than the wide receiver 8 in points per game since joining Philly. Like AJ Brown is a great option still, but I have more faith in Sean McVay than I do with Kellen Moore.
That's fascinating because I think I have AJ Brown as the most confident to return on his ADP. And then I actually think you could split hairs between Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson. I'm mostly a believer in AJ Brown because I'm a believer in the volume that I think Kellen Moore is going to give him. The wide receiver 1 treatment for Kellen Moore wide receivers has been nothing short of incredible. Now, I've heard some people say, well, Devonta Smith is going to be the guy who slides into the slot. I don't think this team is going to have one guy who exclusively slides into the slot. My guess is that they're going to mix some of AJ Brown and Devonta Smith into the slot. I just think AJ Brown is going to be the benefactor of drawing all these wide receiver 1 targets. I think you're going to see more of a Mike Williams-esque kind of treatment, if you will, for Devonta Smith, and you're going to get a Keenan Allen kind of treatment for AJ Brown. Not that they run the same amount of yards or only catch the same amount of yards per reception, right? But in terms of volume, in terms of role within the offense, I would not be surprised if we see AJ Brown be the preferential target and actually launch himself into this A tier when we're talking about him next year. That would not surprise me in the least. I think with Puka and Garrett Wilson, it's going to come down to, for me, it's going to come down to how healthy is Aaron Rodgers? How good is Aaron Rodgers still? That sounds like degrading to a guy, it's a valid question though, from a guy who was a 2-time MVP the year before he, tore his Achilles. How good is he still? And I expressed it on an earlier episode of I'm worried. The last we saw Aaron Rodgers, 2 seasons before he tore his Achilles, the last time we saw Aaron Rodgers career low in yards, and it was a massively down year. Granted, he didn't have Devontae Adams anymore, but I think it's a fair question we have to ask when a guy is entering his 40-year-old season. Who's your favorite wide receiver in this tier? That's how we'll kind of put a bow on this tier, because we talked about level of confidence. We could do deep dives into these guys, but which is your favorite wide receiver in this tier?
I'm going to go with AJ Brown. I just agree with you. A big part for me too is obviously Kellen Moore's coming over, but we've seen AJ Brown do it all. Yards per reception over his career. In 2019, he had 20.2. Then in 2020, 15.4. 2021, he had 13.8. 2022, 17. And then last year, 13.7. So he's done it all over the field, and he's just a guy that you can stick on the outside, and he's going to win every single time, right? He is just bigger. He is faster. He is stronger than any DB you're going to put on. And I love watching AJ Brown play. I think that's a big part of why I like him so much more, because I find it fascinating just how dominant he can be. But he's also a guy who can make things happen after the catch. And I just think if I'm drafting a guy, he's who I'm most confident in. I think Garrett Wilson might have the highest ceiling, just having seen, he's a little bit younger, having seen what he can if Rodgers is fully healthy. But if I'm, like if you said, if I'm saying who I'm most confident in, it's going to be AJ Brown.
The head says Garrett Wilson, but the heart says Puka Nacua. And as someone that benefited from rookie year Puka Nacua in our dynasty league, and many of my best ball teams last year, that's again where my heart is at. But again, my head still says Garrett Wilson, just because we've seen one wide receiver be, elevated, you could say, because of quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers. And again, it's a valid question about where is Aaron Rodgers at, knowing what, the last action that we saw him in. It's a very valid question, but I've seen it in the past with Aaron Rodgers that once he finds a guy, he really, really likes that guy.
That's true.
I think I'm with Cameron. I think my favorite wide receiver here is AJ Brown. We're talking about a guy who finished as the wide receiver 5 overall last year in an offense that quite literally made no sense. As Brett Coleman called it, a high school level offense. Kellen Moore brings anything competent to this team. There is little reason to think that AJ Brown can't repeat that performance last year. And I think, and again, I understand Cooper Kupp may not play as prominent as a role, but when all these Rams were fully healthy last year, I mean, there was only a 1 target difference between Puka and Cooper Kupp, or 2 target difference, excuse me, than Puka and Cooper Kupp. So I think Puka can still be great. I just think Cooper Kupp is going to be more of a headache than Devonta Smith would be for AJ Brown. That's what it comes down to for me. Let's move on to the C tier. And this is where we start getting to some massive tiers here, fellas. Because the C tier is, how do we want to term this? We're just going to call this the second round wide receivers. Because there's an anti-case for all of them, and nobody wants to take a stance on them. You have Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr., Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, and Nico Collins. These are the second round wide receivers. I think Mike Evans in redraft more commonly goes into the third, and we're starting to see Brandon Ayuk slide into the third as well. Otherwise, these are all the second round wide receivers that nobody wants to draft because they all have massive question marks. They could all be lighting your second round pick on fire. You know, with Devontae Adams, it's simply the question of he's old and this offense stinks. Chris Olave, he hasn't done it yet. Drake London, he hasn't done it yet. Marv, he's a rookie. Are we setting the expectations too high? Mike Evans, no Dave Canales. Can Liam Cohen recreate magic? Brandon Ayuk, is he a 49er? Is there enough cake to go around here to have him repeat his efficiency last year? And Nico Collins, again, can we bank on his efficiency last year when you add Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon to this offense? Where should we even start in this tier? Let's start with Devontae Adams. I think he's a fascinating case. Do you have the most confidence in Devontae Adams in this tier?
I have the most confidence that he'll see the most volume. I think that's kind of where it is.
Sure.
Right? I mean, gosh, it's just so... I would love to draft all these guys if it wasn't at their current ADP. That's kind of where I am with pretty much all of these guys. But yeah, I think Mike Evans I might have the most confidence in, but I think Devontae is probably up there just because we've seen it for so long from him, and it's just been the same thing over and over again.
I mean, again, 175 targets last year, 103 receptions, 1,100 yards, which was down, 8 touchdowns. Wide receiver 10 finish, top 10 again. Only the wide receiver 15 in fantasy points per game, but what's changed? You bring in Brock Bowers. They've already said, man, we want our tight ends. We want them blocking first. We want them to earn their reps on the field by being blocking guys. I'm sorry, Brock Bowers really doesn't scare me all that much this year. So every time I'm sitting and looking at the likes of Olave, Drake London, Marvin Harrison, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, why would I not take the proven vet who's done it year after year, Ty?
I don't understand the anti-argument for Devontae Adams because people will say, well, he's going to have bad quarterback play. He's had it for the past 2 years, okay? And it hasn't really affected him that much. Then they'll bring up like the yards per route run and the fact that it's gone down each of the last 3 seasons. Does that not just prove again that his time in Vegas has just not been great because of external factors other than himself? I mean, he's always involved in the offense. He's always running routes. Yes, it's not, Gardner Minshew is not someone that you get overly excited about, but why would things suddenly change for Devontae Adams? Because his yards per route run went down the past 3 seasons. Like again, the anti-argument doesn't click for me. So when you look at this tier and you're like, gosh, there is not one guy that I feel super confident in, follow the guy that's done it in the past. And the guy that's done it in the past has been Devontae Adams. Like Mike Evans, for as great as Mike Evans has been, has not had the volume that you can get with Devontae Adams.
I mean, when Antonio Pierce came in and started taking over, the philosophy changed. It was feed Devontae Adams the football. I mean, 13 targets from week 10 on, 7 targets, 10, 12, 6, 21. 8. I mean, again, you're disappointed with those single digit, but compared to the start of the season where he only topped 10 targets 1, 2, 3 times. I mean, second half of the season showed that, okay, we need to get Devontae Adams the football because he's actually the best player on our team. Crazy, right? Get him the football. I just think there has to be some sort of like, when you look at the rest of the guys in this tier, there's some sort of confidence in Devontae Adams of being the guy you can depend on year over year. Does that mean he's going to finish the highest, though? The answer is no. But he might be the one you have the most confidence in. What we're going to do, fellas, is while we go to break, we're going to think through the question of who would you rather have of Chris Olave, Drake London, and Marvin Harrison Jr. We'll give the people our picks right after this. Brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, where it is best ball summer. There are 5 core best ball tournaments to play in with over $20 million up for grabs this summer. You can even take a crack at winning the top prize of $1.5 million in their infamous Best Ball Mania 5 contest. To enter, head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and use the code FELLAS to get a first deposit bonus up to $250 and our 2024 draft guide for free. Again, head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and use code FELLAS to sign up. Must be 18 plus and present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit npcgambling.org. Alrighty, we are back. We have talked through a good chunk of our top 30 wide receivers. Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Jefferson, Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson. We are currently in the C tier, having talked about Devontae Adams. And now, fellas, who would you rather have out of Chris Olave, Drake London, and Marvin Harrison Jr.? Cameron, I'll let you start.
So I'm going to kind of non-answer it, then I'll answer it. Chris Olave for me is the safest, just because we've seen him finish high year over year, but nothing changed for Chris Olave from last year, right? Nothing's different. So I don't see the same upside as the other two. Marvin Harrison, I think, has the biggest upside because I think he could have a Jamar Chase type year. But if I'm picking one, I'm taking Drake London. And the biggest reason is getting Kirk Cousins now. I've been a believer in, who Drake London is as a wide receiver. He's one of those big body guys. I think he can have a Mike Evans-esque season of maybe 135 targets only, but seeing 1,200 yards, seeing 10 plus touchdowns, right? He's going to be a red zone guy for Kirk. I think he has that upside. He's my highest ranked wide receiver. Obviously, it's been very disappointing, but that's what happens when you have Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder and Arthur Smith, running the whole thing, right? It's disgusting. Now they're going to look to feature their best players, right? That's something that Arthur Blank, the owner, has come out and said, hey, you need to feature these guys that we spent top 10 draft picks on, or everyone's going to be fired again, pretty much is kind of what he came out and said. So I think they're going to look to get Drake London the ball. I think even with Kyle Pitts in that offense and Bijan Robinson, those three, I think, can coexist enough where Drake London has top 10 upside to me this season.
So Cameron goes Drake London. Ty, give me your pick of those three. Chris Olave, Drake London, or Marvin Harrison Jr.?
I say Chris Olave. And this might be just seeing the clearest path forward for Chris Olave over the other two guys. Because it's almost by process of elimination in some ways. I don't know if it's the smartest move to plant a flag essentially in this kind of question on a rookie wide receiver that has yet to play an NFL snap. And don't get us wrong. Like, we think that Marvin Harrison is quite literally the greatest wide receiver prospect that we've seen in recent memory, but there is an adjustment period for rookies. Drake London, yes, he's getting the quarterback upgrade with Kirk, but I don't think we're going to see like the same Kirk Cousins in terms of fantasy production that we saw in Minnesota. I think this is going to be a very different Kirk Cousins than in years past. So that really does leave me with Olave. And again, Olave may not have the same kind of upside or ceiling as Drake London or Marvin Harrison Jr. But again, he's got the clearest path to some sort of production. And honestly, in this second round of wide receivers where, gosh, everything is just gross, it might be the smarter play just to kind of go with what's safe here in the second round. And for me, that's Chris Olave.
So I really like the Chris Olave take this year, where everybody wants to zag on Chris Olave. I am very much willing to zig. I can't find one person except for maybe Rich Rebar who is in on Chris Olave this year, solely because of the offensive coordinator change. I know, Cameron, I know you meant like personnel, nothing has really changed, but Like Clint Kubiak coming over from San Francisco. We got to witness it firsthand in Minnesota. It wasn't great, but frankly, whatever the heck the Saints were running last year is worse than whatever Clint Kubiak is going to put out there, because this is a team that was second to last in play action percentage and dead last in usage of motion. That means something in the modern NFL. If you're just going to expect Chris Olave to get open one-on-one on the sidelines with Derek Carr throwing in the football, you're not going to have a lot of success. You're asking Chris a lot of Chris Olave. You're not giving him any easy looks, any easy receptions to get in rhythm, anything easy in this offense. Nothing came easy in this offense except for checkdowns to Alvin Kamara last year. So I love with Clint Kubiak coming over. You're going to free open Chris Olave more. You're going to get him some easier looks. You're going to get him in rhythm more. You're going to get this offense in rhythm more, despite the offensive line, kind of falling apart with Ryan Ramczyk, which frankly, I think just opens up more short across the middle looks for Chris Olave, more yards after catch opportunities. That being said, I trust the quarterback play of Drake London a lot more than I do Derek Carr. And that is why I would take Drake London in this range, solely for that reason. I think you're going to, again, I'm really going to buy into Arthur Blank there and say, we spent top 10 draft capital on these guys. We got to get them involved. We spent the money on the quarterback and spent another top 10 draft pick on a quarterback to make sure these guys get involved, to make sure we have an air raid offense. And I think you're going to see that this year. So I do prefer Drake London, but Chris Olave is like the very close second for me this year. Again, nothing against Marv. We all think the world of Marv, but I think it's Drake London for me. Drake London, Chris Olave, and Marvin Harrison Jr. Would be my preference in that order. I don't want to throw Mike Evans out the window. We could probably spend some time talking about Mike Evans, but I think we're going to have a more productive conversation around Brandon Ayuk and Nico Collins, because I think these are two guys who, again, last season were very efficient in terms of yards per reception. Didn't do it on a high volume of targets, and that appears to be the case for both guys going into the 2024 season. Do you two have a preference between Brandon Ayuk or Nico Collins?
My rankings say Ayuk, but I'm starting to come closer where I think it's pretty 50-50. Just looking at the offense, right, for both of them, I agree. I don't think the efficiency stays necessarily. I think the targets have to come up. And if I'm looking at it, Houston's going to throw the ball more. I mean, they both, they're both got a lot of guys they're competing with. And I think Houston's just going to end up throwing the ball more. So I kind of am starting to close the gap with Nico. I think Ayuk's a better wide receiver and a better offense, but man, it is really close. And it's just going to be who can get more volume between the two is for me personally what I think it comes down to. So I'm going to lean Ayuk, but I think it's very close.
Can I say neither?
You can say neither. That's fine. Neither, and give me one of the guys in the next tier.
Well,
he'll give me Mike Evans
the next tier.
I mean, you can. It's an option.
No, I lean Nico Collins just because I think you can make similar arguments in terms of just what's available to each of these guys in terms of targets, right? With Diggs coming over to Houston, and then there's really no there's no change really in San Francisco's offense. So you can ask the question of where's the additional volume going to come from for both of these guys? Maybe I'm just too scared off by the amount of potential regression that we could see with Brandon Ayuk. And again, too, I think it's a different question then if we see Brandon Ayuk traded, just because then I think you could look at it in terms of just what the cost will be for both of these guys. And I think if Ayuk goes to Washington, you're going to see his cost drop, and then I'm going to be way more in on Brandon Ayuk than I am with Nico Collins. But as things stand right now, I don't know. I also got this weird feeling that Ayuk is going to have this a Josh Jacobs type holdout or a Jonathan Taylor type holdout, that he's going to wait until week 4, week 5 of the regular season. And then it's just not going to be the same Brandon Ayuk that we saw last year. So I lean Nico Collins. But my true answer is neither, and Mike Evans.
I do got to say, in a vacuum, I like all these wide receivers. It's just about ADP. And so my favorite guy in this tier is whoever I can get in the 3rd round. Is kind of where I'm landing with these guys. It's whichever one I don't have to take in the second round is pretty much where I'm at.
That's fascinating. You'd rather take Mike Evans. I think I would rather take the shot on the upside here than I would with Mike Evans, mostly because I'm not saying last year was unrepeatable for Mike Evans. I just don't know if the same upside is there in 15.9 yards per reception, drawing only 136 targets and getting over 12,500 yards, 1,205, goodness, 1,250 yards. I can't even spit it out. Considering, this guy hasn't touched that mark since 2018. He's been sitting around 1,100 yards. And I just wonder if that starts to come down. We see Chris Godwin bounce back more, and that comes at the expense of Mike Evans. So that's fine. You can say neither and take Mike Evans. I think I would rather take the shot on Nico Collins here. That was as the younger guy than Mike Evans in what I believe is going to be a better offense. And I think I would take him ahead of Ayuk as well. Just I think there's less question marks, which sounds super weird to say, about Nico Collins than there are about Brandon Ayuk. If he does get traded, if he does hold out, just give me the guy who I know is going to be on the football field and has a chance to be on potentially the best passing offense in the NFL. We got a lot of players to talk about in this next year. We've mentioned it on previous podcasts. This year, there is just a massive tier where it is, this is truly the pick your flavor tier. Because it is, we're going to ramble through all the names, so buckle up, y'all. T. Higgins, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Devonta Smith, Michael Pittman Jr., Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Malik Neighbors. That is the D tier for us. And it is almost difficult to talk about this many players. I will say the one that we may have higher in our rankings compared to ADP is T. Higgins, Cooper Kupp, and who else do we have? Amari Cooper a little bit higher than ADP, but let's start with T. Higgins and Cooper Kupp for sure, because these are two we have higher than ADP. Cameron, what's up with our belief in T. Higgins?
Well, it's you two. I'm a wide receiver 25, so I'm actually pretty close to ADP.
That is true. You are right around ADP.
This is you two on some sort of T. Higgins high with him as both your wide receiver 15s. I understand it. I think he's got great upside, and it's really dependent on Joe Burrow and T. Higgins' ability to stay healthy, right? You're banking on the health of both of them. I think he's going to bounce back, right? He was the wide receiver 51 last year, wide receiver 42 in points per game. I don't think we see that again. I don't think we see anything close to that. Just my worry is Jamar Chase is significantly more the alpha in this offense. Like it's a Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle situation. And if I'm betting on those two, I'm going to take, for me personally, Waddle over T. Higgins. That's why I got T. Higgins a little bit lower. I just don't think there's any dynamic where it's like a 1A, 1B situation.
So, okay. So let's transition to Cooper Kupp on that note then, because if we're looking at 1A, 1B, how confident, give me the percentage of confidence that you think Cooper Kupp can actually be a 1B with Puka Nacua. Because you two, Cameron, you have him ranked as such. You have him as wide receiver 14, Tyre a little bit lower at 18. But give me the percent this could truly be a 1A, 1B between Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Because that's one of the reasons we said it's nothing against Puka. It's just he might have the lowest upside of this bunch.
Yeah, I think it's pretty high. I got it closer to 70%. I think we could see a 2022 Devonta Smith, AJ Brown, where AJ Brown was wide receiver 5, Devonta Smith was wide receiver 9. I think that's where you could see it, where they're very close in targets, but I think Puka's going to kind of get those more, higher fantasy point producing targets down the field, probably score a little more touchdowns. Although I do think Cooper Kupp's fantastic in the red zone. So I think that kind of keeps him up there. But I feel like it is, for me, 70% that Cooper Kupp is kind of that 1B more than like a 1-2 kind of guy.
What about you, Ty?
I would say I'm closer, probably like 60%, just because I do think that while that is a reality that, we could see both of them finish as top 12 wide receivers, this Rams team is going to have a run game, and they rely on that run game a lot, right? Kyron Williams was running back 2 in points per game. So like, as much as, again, like it's the run game versus the pass game, like Kyron Williams is going to kind of take away just general opportunities for both of these guys. So and in some way, like I wonder, again, kind of like what you were saying, Cam, like Puka is going to get like the higher producing fantasy targets that are going to be downfield, the big plays, all those kind of things. But I think Cooper Kupp is kind of entering into this range of wide receivers where it's the volume that you're going to be in on, right? So like, you know, we're going to talk about guys like Michael Pittman later. I think there's an argument to be made for Stephon Diggs that could still be a volume kind of guy. But like, there's nothing wrong with Cooper Kupp, you know, being a top 20 option this year. Like I've got him as my wide receiver A team, but I would say it's probably closer to like 60% that we see a 1A, 1B in that Rams offense.
I'm really tempted to push this to 75%. My ranking doesn't show it, but I've got to update this Rams offense. I'm really tempted to push this to 75%. I think I'm with Cameron at 70 though, because Ty, to counter your point of this team's going to have a running offense when Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua were all healthy, weeks 12 to 17 last year. Kyron Williams, running back 2 overall, led the league in rush attempts by 19. He had 131 rush attempts. The next closest guy was Rachaad White with 112. He was still averaging 5.3 yards per carry, still scored 6 touchdowns, saw 24 targets in the passing game, averaging 24 fantasy points per game. Believe it or not, that was still a full point less than Christian McCaffrey, but that's not the point we're trying to make here. Kyron Williams was still plenty involved, yet you look at Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Puka was the wide receiver 6, while Cooper Kupp was the wide receiver 10. I mean, Puka was averaging 17.8 fantasy points per game. Cooper Kupp, 15.8 fantasy points per game. Now, albeit 15.8 fantasy points per game was closer to the wide receiver 20 than it was the wide receiver 10 in fantasy points per game. And Puka Nacua was just outside of the top 10. But the point I'm trying to say in that is like, I wonder if there is a world where we see Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp like both finish in the C tier according to our rankings this year. I wonder if there's a world where that happens and we see, you know, a Drake London, Chris Olave, whoever it may be, take a leap into that B tier, and we see Puka kind of slide and Cooper Kupp really emerge into that C tier. I just think this Rams offense under Sean McVay is too good, and they have too many ways to attack a defense where they can't sell out against the pass. They can't sell out against the run because this team has 3 wide receivers on the field almost every single play, and they can burn you over the top. They can burn you up the middle on the run. They can burn you across the middle of the field. They can burn you underneath. They can win all over the field, and I just wonder if we're underestimating how good this Los Angeles Rams offense will actually be for fantasy football this year. So with that in mind, let's talk about another offense that can be really, really good for fantasy football this year. I'm wondering if we have Jalen Waddle ranked too low. We all have Jalen Waddle right around the wide receiver 20s, our average rank. Cam, you have him at 20. I have him at 19. Tyler, you have him at 21. He does currently go off the board as the wide receiver 19. So we have him ranked right around ADP. I'm wondering if this is just a steal, though. I'm wondering if we get a big bounce back year from Jalen Waddle, because Cameron last year obviously was a disappointment for managers if you drafted Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with him, DK, and Devonta Smith, where I'm just like, I feel like they should be higher. I just can't convince myself to push them higher because all of them, like you said, all of them are kind of in that same boat of they were wide receiver 20, 21, and 23 in fantasy points per game last year. All of them. And like you said, Jalen Waddle's on the best offense out of all of them, right? He's on the most pass-happy offense for sure. Seattle, you can make the argument, with Ryan Grubb, they could be in that situation. But we know it's going to be a dynamic offense. And if he's healthy, we've seen him be awesome before. So I agree. It just feels like when I take Jalen Waddle, I'm excited, right? When I get him in the third round, I'm excited. When I take Brandon Ayuk in the second round, I'm like, I don't know if I really wanted to do that, right? And so that's kind of the feeling I get with Waddle. So I understand. And I feel like, I do feel like he should be moving up our rankings. I just am struggling to kind of really get him up there. But it's like you said, it's just because it's such a big stinking tier. And he's going in the middle of this tier. And so if he's going in the middle of this tier with high upside, I do want to take him there. So I feel very similar between him, DK Metcalf, and Devonta Smith.
Yeah, you could. I think people are going to look at the order in which we have this tier and overthink it. You could reorder this tier
Yes.
15 different ways.
Yep.
And I'm going to say, cool, I'm good with that. And I think that's the point we're trying to make in such a massive tier like this is you're going to be happy with almost any of these guys when you click their name on the draft board. Actually, I think there's maybe one or two guys I wouldn't be super thrilled with. And I'll highlight at least one of them in a moment. But most of the guys in this tier, you can rearrange them however you want. And I'm going to say, goodbye me. There's absolutely a case for that. But Ty, do you think we're a little bit too low on Jalen Waddle? And are people drafting Jalen Waddle at his ADP as a form of punishment for last year?
I think where he goes in drafts right now is actually kind of like the perfect spot, and any lower is just even more value. I think going higher is where we get a little kind of overboard with Jalen Waddle. I mean, we are like Jalen Waddle last year. Yeah, we all know that like last year was not a super great year. It felt like an off year, but it is because like he did have 4 yards less per reception. He went from 18.1 in 2022 to 14.1 in 2023. And his touchdowns didn't help either, went from 8 to 4. And the volume was relatively the same. So in some weird way, I feel like this is a very similar art, like Brandon Ayuk is on the Jalen Waddle kind of like, pathway. But with Jalen Waddle, that if let's say we get a 16 yard per reception, stat versus 14 from last year, Jalen Waddle's pushing top 15, right? Because that's just how close we have all of these guys in this tier. So I think for Jalen Waddle, I think right now where he's going, I don't want to say it's his floor, but I will say it's a safe spot because again, this guy is going at the end of the 3rd round versus last year. He was going at the end of the 2nd. So we're getting like a full round drop on Jalen Waddle when things are still kind of relatively the same. Last year, the question was like, can he improve again on 18 yards per reception on 117 targets and 8 touchdowns? We saw that didn't happen. So yes, he's falling in drafts, but I think the position where he goes in drafts right now is much more easy to say like, yeah, I want Jalen Waddle compared to what it was last year. So maybe the long story short is just that, like, I think where he goes in drafts right now is fair because what the upside is, that he can push top 15, but you're not having to pay top 15 capital for him.
Which I think is a fair point to make. I think he's the classic. I don't like drafting any of the 2nd round guys, but yet who are you going to replace those 2nd round guys with that's going to make you feel any better? Which is why I think when you get Jalen Waddle in that range, it's like, great. I don't have to pay the 2nd round price tag on him like I thought I would have to this year, because I do think he fits very closely in that tier of Chris Olave, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr. So that's why I think I might be a little too low on him. But again, if I push him any higher, it's getting into that range of like, yeah, but am I sure? Which makes me fine with his current ADP and where I have him ranked, which is right at ADP. The last 4 guys in this tier are Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, and Malik Neighbors. 3 of those guys, not Stephon Diggs, are basically chalked for volume this year, right? We can agree those are probably the volume guys. Is there a world where Stephon Diggs actually finishes in the E tier or even outside of the top 30 wide receivers this year?
You have to say there is after the end of last year. I mean, the end of last year was just, it was confusing. It was like, you look at his stats, he had 160 targets. He was the wide receiver 9. Like, you look at his season stats and you're like, oh, that's not bad. And then you look at what he did to end last year, and it was just like, he just completely disappeared. After their bye in the last 5 games, he only had 1 game with over 5 receptions. He only had 1 game with over 50 receiving yards. He didn't score a touchdown. And it was just like, where did he go? And now you come to an offense with 2 budding stars. Nico Collins, they just paid like a star. Tank Dell flashed last year. He could easily be the wide receiver 3 in this offense. It's just, but at the same time, we know how good he is, and I don't want to give him up going to another young quarterback. He's a guy that when I get to him every time in a draft, I'm like, I really don't want to draft him. but I feel wrong for continually discounting him. You know, that's the battle
Right.
that I'm kind of fighting with him. So I do think that world definitely exists. I also think that the world exists where he's the number one in Houston and he's the guy that we should have been drafting all along. But I'm starting to lean more and more that I think it's closer to he could fall outside the D tier, into the E tier, into the F tier.
Which is where you're ranking reflects, Cameron. You have him as the wide receiver 30. I mean, you have him ranked in that tier. I'm not saying it's Ty's fault that he's still in this tier, but I mean, I've him at wide receiver 21, so he would still be in this tier. But Ty, you do have him the highest at wide receiver 17. That's what I was trying to get to. What's your level of confidence in that ranking, though?
It's not rock solid. But at the same time, I think where we have him ranked consensus wise is like spot on, because we have one of us in me saying that like he has this kind of upside if things kind of play into his favor. But we also have Cam's ranking in wide receiver 30 of where things don't play into his favor, right? So consensus, he's our wide receiver 30. Math is hard. What is it? 24, 25?
Correct.
24, yes.
I really feel like that low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 in flex territory is like perfect spot for Stefon Diggs. I think it's safe to say that Diggs is not going to be the downfield guy, going to be the big play guy. I think that's going to be Nico Collins and Tank Dell in this offense. But I think Stefon Diggs can like ugly volume his way into being somewhat of a reliable option in a starting lineup week to week. Now, I know that the question was just like, how much certainty do I have in his finish, not dropping into the top 30. But the fact is that like he's going as a wide receiver 16 in drafts, middle of the third round. That is a tough price to pay.
Mm-hmm.
But over in like best ball, he's going like wide receiver 24, right where we kind of have him. I'm kind of okay with that, just because then you look at who else is going around him and et cetera like that. But again, I don't have the utmost confidence that he can be that, top 20 wide receiver. But I also don't want to like put him into a box that he's going to definitely fall out of the top 25. He's going to finish outside the top 30.
Yeah, and this is where best ball drafts can be super formative for how you view your redraft leagues as well, because in best ball, obviously, it's formatted differently. It's scored differently in terms of your best lineup is inserted every week. So you want higher upside guys, which you could argue there's definitely higher upside guys than Stefon Diggs in this tier. Thus, his ADP gets pushed down. But when you look at it from a redraft perspective, I don't think the redraft rankings, the redraft ADP always tells the whole story of these players, which is where best ball is super helpful in adding a piece of that puzzle. So if you see us post a video about an underdog draft on our shorts channel, it's not that we think underdog is the best way to play. It is, I think, one of the best ways to prepare yourselves for your home league. So if you want to get in on that, code fellas over on underdogs, you heard earlier in the episode, it is best ball summer. You can come draft with us, get our draft guide for free when you use our code to sign up to $250 in bonus cash plus an Olympic free square, because the Olympics are going on right now. The basketball players are basketballing, the swimmers are swimming, the volleyballers are volleyballing, the gymnasts are tumbling. Got a lot going on. Code fellas over on underdog. Let's wrap out the show, fellas, with the E tier. Terry McLaurin, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Zay Flowers. These aren't exciting guys to talk about. And Cameron, you've already expressed your love for Deontay Johnson on a previous episode. I'm not taking him off the table, but I'm going to force you to pick someone out of Terry McLaurin, Christian Kirk, or Zay Flowers that you prefer in this tier. And actually, I'm going to take Zay Flowers off the table because we've also talked about Zay Flowers in a previous episode. Where he may actually be overvalued. Mm-hmm. So what's the bull case for Terry McLaurin this year? Can we make a bull case for Terry McLaurin? Is there one out there?
It's that
Can we create one?
He's the Malik Neighbors for Jaden Daniels this season. I mean, that's what it is that he's just going to see down the field, right? He's going to average 17 yards per reception. He's going to have just tons of volume. Jaden Daniels is special. That is the bull case. I don't know how likely it is, but I feel like that is the bull case that Jaden Daniels comes out and that arm is special. That it's got some pop, and then he's just looking for McLaurin down the field. So I guess I don't know, Ty. What do you think the bull case is for Terry McLaurin?
Well, I mean, I've got Terry as my wide receiver 24 in my rankings. That's because I just went through the Commanders, I restatted them out, and I was like, I don't know why people are kind of. I don't want to say I don't get why. I get why people are out on the Washington offense. But Terry, this is his best quarterback that he's had in the last 3 years. And he's had 70 receptions or more. And to be specific, he's had no less than 77 receptions in each of the last 4 years. He's had 130 targets in 3 of those last 4 seasons. He's only scored 4, 5, 5, and 4 in the last 4 seasons. He hasn't scored more than 5 touchdowns. I have to think that he has a little more touchdown upside now with Jaden Daniels as his quarterback, with Cliff Kingsbury being his play caller now. I don't want to say that like I'm going to be like all in on this Commanders offense, but the fact is that Terry has been kind of quietly. Can I say it like Walmart Chris Olave, Walmart Michael Pittman? Can I say it like that?
No. You can call him DJ Moore before 2023. I don't know if you can call him Walmart Chris Olave, though. Maybe you can.
I see Olave.
Okay,
I don't know about Pittman. Olave I could get behind. I don't know about Pittman, but I could get behind Olave.
Did I say Pittman? I meant DJ.
No,
Tyler
I said Pittman.
Oh, you said Pittman. Yeah, okay, so Olave I can see a little bit. Walmart still feels not generous. Still, like, can we go Kmart? If we go Kmart Olave, I'd be okay with that.
Sure.
Not to nitpick here, but like,
Kmart just got an unnecessary shot.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I feel like if we're gonna call somebody Walmart Olave, they got to be in the D tier, not in the E tier. But if you do you, boo, you can call him Walmart Olave.
I just feel like we've looked at Terry as a guy that's been a relatively like safe option that just has not possessed a super high ceiling. You know what you were getting with Terry McLaurin each of the last 3 seasons. Again, you're getting 77 receptions, 130 targets. That's what you were getting. But he's now getting the quarterback upgrade, and he's going to be in a better offense with a better play caller. So I don't want to say that people are too low on the Commanders offense, because because there are question marks everywhere. Like, I'm not going to be like completely like, I'm not going to ignore the question marks in this offense, but like, why can't Terry now be a top 24 guy? Like, things things are playing out correctly in his favor this year.
Wait for
I think
this.
that is my concern. Go for it.
Well, maybe we flip it. Is Chris Olave in danger of becoming the next Terry McLaurin? I want to read you their second-year stats side by side, and you tell me.
That is working wired. Tired is
year 2. Year 2, Terry McLaurin had 134 targets, 87 receptions, 1,118 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Year 2 for Chris Olave, 138 targets, 87 receptions, same amount of receptions, 1,123 yards, only 5 yards apart, and 1 more touchdown with 5. If Chris Olave doesn't get this quarterback play figured out, he could be in that Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore category pretty easily, which is kind of scary to think about.
I'm okay inversing that. I'm okay of inversing is framing the question around Chris Olave. I think if we frame that question about Terry McLaurin, we're implying Terry McLaurin can make this elite level jump that Chris Olave was drafted to be, which I don't necessarily agree with. But if we're talking about Chris Olave having the floor of Terry McLaurin, that is where I think we have a valid conversation.
For sure.
Christian Kirk is the last guy we'll breeze through here. They added Brian Thomas Jr. in this offseason, brought in Gabe Davis as well. They brought in 2 guys who could work down the field, though I think really what it's going to look like is Gabe Davis is working down the field, Brian Thomas is working the intermediate. You got Christian Kirk then underneath. Is there any room for Christian Kirk to repeat 2022 where he was a top 12 fantasy wide receiver? I don't think anybody is predicting that, but is there any room for that?
I think he can sniff it. I mean, the thing is, for me, that year wasn't spectacular, right? It was 133 targets, 84 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I mean, Trevor Lawrence throws 30 touchdowns this year, which is not out of the realm of possibilities. I think he could sniff 7 or 8. And I mean, 133 targets, you're not asking him for him to be, in that upper echelon like the Garrett Wilsons, AJ Browns, Puka Nacuas. You're asking him to maybe just take a little bit of that step up. And, I think he could easily be a top 20 wide receiver this season. I like him. US, who I like most out of this tier. I have Terry one spot higher than Christian Kirk, but I think I like Christian Kirk the most out of everyone in this tier. Well, besides Deontay Johnson, of course.
I mean, I would agree. I do have Christian Kirk ranked the highest out of this tier. I mean, yeah, you're right. Deontay, what are you shaking your head out? What are you shaking your head for?
I want to go back to this real quick. Cam said that out of everyone in this tier, say that again. Out of this tier, Christian Kirk is what?
My favorite, except for Deontay.
Okay.
Because he didn't allow me to pick Deontay.
I just wanted to make sure.
I realized that there was only two other players besides Christian Kirk with no Deontay. So then it trapped me in this statement. And now you have to bring it back. And now it's awkward. We were fine. We were past it. And then Ty's like, we got to talk about it. Ridiculous.
I just wanted to make sure you didn't have some sort of enlightenment on your unlimited PTO that you're like, Christian Kirk is
Christian Kirk belongs in the B tier. He's with Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson. No. I mean, I do have Christian Kirk ranked the highest out of this tier. I think I have the most confidence in him out of anybody out of this tier. I am worried Terry McLaurin is just kind of DJ Moore forever. I'm seriously concerned about that. I don't think it would take a team change necessarily, but when you look at that Chicago Bears offense last year, it was DJ Moore and nobody else to catch the football on that team. We all still like Jahan Dotson. We're still all Jahan Dotson believers. I know there really isn't anybody else outside of Terry McLaurin, but I've seen it from Christian Kirk, therefore I'm more likely to believe in it. With Terry McLaurin, I have just enough question marks yet where I'm not ready to make him my favorite out of this tier. But you're right, Cameron. I don't think he gets top 12 again, but is there a top 20 upside in here? Absolutely. I think it's totally possible he finishes as a top 20 wide receiver right in the middle of that D tier this year. Let's put a bow on our rankings discussion there. 30 wide receivers, a crap ton of them. We talked about a lot. Let us know what you agree with, disagree with down in the comments. Because if you do that over on our new YouTube channel at The Fantasy Football Fellas, you'll be entered to win a free copy of our 2024 draft guide. We're choosing one winner from every video for the rest of the month. So again, subscribe over at youtube.com/@TheFantasyFootballFellas. Comment below on this video. Make sure you subscribe. We will choose one lucky winner per video. You can follow me and the fellas on Twitter. I am at Lucas Wencl. CamLaw FFF for Cameron Tyler _Plath. You can follow the main page as well. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook and TikTok. Coming back this week, we have our top 20 tight end rankings. Yes, we're going to get deep down and nasty in the tight end rankings, 20 of them. Bet you can't wait to hear who we have ranked after the tight end 12 because it gets gross. It is purely a toss-up. That is truly the right noise for the tight end rankings. We'll make one exception from that being the Cameron noise and instead make it the tight end noise. But until then, stay safe, stay healthy. We will see you all next time. Deuces.
Deuces.